Welcome to The World This Week, episode 32, Neo-Israelites versus Neo-Ottomans. This week, Greater Israel and Greater Turkey meet in Syria. Are tactical nukes aimed at Tehran and the killing fields of Gaza? I'm Joe Loria, the editor-in-chief of Consortium News. Tensions soar between Tel Aviv and Ankara. A military clash that had seemed inevitable between Israel and Turkey is now on the boil after Israel bombed a Syrian airbase near the Turkish border on Tuesday after it said Turkish troops were to deploy there. Israeli officials outrageously claimed the attack was in self-defense against Turkey in a third country. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz warned Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan against, quote, dragging Turkey into dangerous adventures in Syria and, quote, testing Israel's determination to defend itself. An Israeli ambassador described the Turkish move as crossing a red line. Turkey responded by accusing Israel of expansionism, whose red line, and yesterday formally requested that Interpol issue a red notice for Netanyahu as a war criminal. Netanyahu accused Erdogan of being an anti-Semitic dictator. The collapse of bilateral trade since 2024 has not affected oil sales to Israel shipped through Turkey, however. Both countries wanted the overthrow of Syria's Bashar al-Assad and backed various jihadist groups towards that end. Once Assad fell, their common aims ended. Erdogan has not hidden his neo-Ottoman aspirations. In February 2016, he shelled Syrian Kurdish areas in Aleppo province, especially the city of Azaz, near Dabik, the town where the Ottoman Empire began in 1516. Since then, thousands of Turkish troops remain in Syria, and Turkey has established bases in Qatar and Somalia as it expands its influence over the region. These expansionist dreams clash with Tel Aviv's Greater Israel project, which includes Syria. Israel already illegally occupies Syria's Golan Heights and seized territory in southern Syria to within 60 kilometers of Damascus after Assad fell in December 2024. The two expanding regional powers are bound to collide. The Americans are trying to play referee between its two allies. Tom Barrack, Washington's ambassador to Ankara and special envoy for Syria, accused Israel of, quote, baiting Turkey in a ploy ahead of Israel's October elections. He said Ankara could have activated fighter jets to intercept the Israeli warplanes, risking, quote, an unnecessary escalation, the FT reported. On Saturday, Barrack said this could have resulted in, quote, World War III. Meanwhile, given that Trump is trapped in a nightmare of his own making with Iran, unable to win and unable to get out without admitting defeat, news came this week that in his desperation he might reach for the ultimate weapon. Former U.S. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeted this week, quote, they are discussing using nuclear weapons on Iran in strategy meetings. Yes, you read that correctly. It's real. I'm not speculating. I know. And it's pure evil, close quote. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar said this week he was, quote, quite certain, quote, close quotes, the weapon would be used, and the weapon would be a B-61 tactical nuclear bomb already present in the U.S. Central Command's region. Earlier this month, NBC News reported that a plan to use tactical nukes is being drafted by Pentagon's policy chief, Elbridge Colby, who for more than a decade has called for the U.S. to develop capabilities to fight, quote, a limited nuclear war, close quote, if there is such a thing. Can the Trump administration really be this dumb and reckless? In Gaza, the Israeli genocide continues after Trump's son-in-law met with Hamas officials and Netanyahu this week. The discussions focused on advancing Trump's so-called 15-point Board of Peace roadmap, which links phased his Hamas disarmament to Israeli withdrawal and other steps. No breakthrough, of course, occurred. Israel insists on a full Hamas disarmament before any significant withdrawal or halt to operations. Hamas has indicated willingness to disarm under certain conditions, but demands Israel first meet ceasefire obligations, including withdrawal first. Meanwhile, Israel stepped up airstrikes across Gaza and pushes to increase its territory of the enclave. Palestinian health officials report more than 1,250 to 1,283 Palestinians have been killed, mostly civilians, and thousands injured by Israel since the ceasefire began last December. Russia's strategy in Ukraine has come into focus. The air war in Ukraine has intensified during the week with strikes on both Kiev and Moscow as Russia grinds it out in Donbass and is effectively creating a blockade of the port of Odessa with airstrikes meant to eventually turn Ukraine into an effectively landlocked country. And at the Pentagon, run under TV personality Pete Hegseth and his TV producer wife, according to the New York Times, Hegseth pulled off another brazen stunt this week when he fired the editor and the publisher of the nominally independent military newspaper, Stars and Stripes. We'll discuss all this with our guest, Ray McGovern, former CIA analyst, and Scott Ritter, former U.S. Marine Corps counterintelligence officer and UN weapons inspector. Ray and Scott, thank you for coming back to the world this week. Let me start with you, Scott. Should anyone be worried about a real shooting war between Israel and Turkey?
Well, the potential's there, but I would say no. Erdogan is a notorious fence sitter. He's a man who has spent many years articulating in very vivid, in a very vivid manner, how evil Israel is in Gaza. But you sort of hit the nail on the head. Azerbaijani oil still flows through Turkey into Israel. It's a lifeline that Erdogan could have cut a long time ago that would have brought real harm to this evil genocidal regime. There's also the reality that Turkey has long been positioned itself to be a regional energy hub, especially in terms of gas. They want to become the place that sets the price of gas in Europe. And in order to do that, they, of course, have to have gas flowing through Turkey. They have Turk Stream from Russia. They have Turkmenistan gas. They really want Israeli gas, the giant Israeli gas fields. And they've been pushing for that, too. So to cut the strings with Israel would create almost fatal damage to Erdogan's long-term vision of the kind of economic revival necessary to pull Turkey out of its current economic doldrums. And so I don't see Turkey and Israel going to war. I wish they would, because I, for one, know that the Turkish military would crush the Israeli military in about 3.2 seconds. The Turks know how to kill, and the Israelis don't know how to die well. And it would just be a slaughter that would be pleasing to the eye, given the fact that Israel is literally a genocidal state. But I'm supposed to be a practitioner of peace, and I should be embracing nonviolence. So I will go back to my original assessment, which is Erdogan is not pushing for a conflict with Israel, and Israel, of course, senses weakness and seeks to set the mood, so to speak. If Erdogan was actually primed to fight, Turkish fighters would have been in the air and they would have shot down the Israeli fighters. That's a 100% guarantee, or at least they would have engaged. Turkish air defense would have engaged. Turkey did nothing because Turkey will do nothing because Erdogan simply isn't looking for a war with Israel.
We didn't hear that part about going to war with Israel then. Ray, do you agree with that assessment? It's just a great theater that we're witnessing here?
Yeah, I don't think Erdogan is really worth taking seriously. As we were talking about this, if you go back half a century, I was involved in a really interesting imbroglio when the Turks invaded Cyprus. Okay, and to make a long story short, Kissinger and everyone in NATO was damn bent on making sure that the embargo that the U.S. Congress put on weapons deliveries to Turkey, because Turkey had violated U.S. law, by using the weapons we gave them to attack another country. Well, it was really, really intense, and the politics of this were really bad. So I'm representing the director then. I was the National Intelligence Officer for Western Europe. I'm down there at the State Department, and I'm trying to think of gloom and doom, and what are these Turks? Oh, these Turks are going to close our bases. And I had already been informed by our technical people. That doesn't matter. We've got stuff that's going to substitute for those bases coming online in a month. Anyhow, I said, look, look at it this way. Maybe there's a silver lining here. All these high muckety mucks here from the State Department. I said, look, maybe the next time Israel thinks it can use our weapons to go out and attack another country, maybe they'll think twice about it. What? The reaction was like I was from Mars, And it was then that I got my first-hand glimpse of how allergic senior military and diplomatic officials in the State Department were to any notion that anything untoward could be done against Israel just because they invaded another country. So that's a little tangential, but it has to do with Israel, it has to do with Turkey, and the Turks still occupy that part of Cyprus, and Kissinger got his wish, because if the true story be told, he told Ambassador McGovern in Ankara, close down those intelligence collection sites. And McGovern said, but the Turks haven't asked us to do that. Close them down. So they closed them down. Then Kissinger went to Congress and said, they've closed down now. Oh my God, this is terrible. So anyhow, it was an interesting involvement in Turkey, Israel, and of course, Cyprus and Greece. And it taught me a lot about how allergic people are to any notion that we could put any regulation on arms aid to Israel, even though we have U.S. laws against letting other countries use our arms to invade other people. So just throw that in.
Well, it might be an ego trip for Erdogan, the idea of recreating even a limited Ottoman Empire, but Israel's damn serious about Greater Israel. Look at the pile of corpses it's left behind so far. Gaza, Lebanon, Iran. Syria is a part of Greater Israel. Who could stop them? If not, as Scott pointed out, if not the Turks. They have the military. They have the largest military, don't they? I believe larger even than Israel's. Who could stop Israel but Turkey, Ray?
Well, yeah, if Israel goes that far, I think that the U.S. might counsel caution on the part of both of them, because it would be a really unacceptable position to put the U.S. and NATO in, to have a NATO ally fighting Israel. So again, there are lots of reasons why I don't think it's going to happen either, but that's an additional one. I think the U.S. still has very close ties with Turkey as well as with Israel, closer, of course, with Israel. But I think one of the residual things that they do have, that is our policymakers, is to put the brakes on something like this. But Scott may think otherwise.
Well, the U.S. is trying to do that. Scott?
I'm in trouble because I mean, it just seems funny that we recognize Israel as a genocidal state. You speak about piles of bodies, but the moment I articulate the desirability of Turkey to crush Israel, people get nervous. Israel is Greater Israel. It's a threat to the region. It's a threat to the world. And but I do think we have to put a couple things in perspective. One, last time I checked, it was Hezbollah that was slaughtering Israeli soldiers very effectively in southern Lebanon. Yes, Israel does its normal business of bombing villages and murdering civilians. But when it comes time to a stand-up fight, it's Hezbollah that's killing the Israeli soldiers, not the other way around. And the last time I checked, it was Iran's missiles that were raining death and destruction on Israeli targets without the ability of Israel to defend itself. So Greater Israel is very much in check, which is why Israel's panicked, because they are in check in Lebanon. There is no solution. They tried a workaround. It's funny today how people are slamming Tom Barak But the last time I checked, it was Tom Barak who orchestrated this ridiculous rapprochement between the Lebanese government and Israel, where the president of Lebanon legitimized the ongoing Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon, saying that we don't object to it, therefore it's not illegitimate, therefore Hezbollah has no right to resist it. That, of course, went over like a lead balloon. But the other thing we have to remember is it's forget NATO for a second, because Turkey's not a real NATO member. It is in name only. But Turkey's been waging major military actions outside of its borders that have nothing to do with NATO. Turkey's been, of course, working with a certain Libyan faction that is not the Libyan faction that is approved by the European Union. If we remember a while ago, a French naval vessel attempted to intercept a Turkish convoy supplying weapons, and the Turks said, if you come an inch closer, we'll sink you. And the French cried and whined, and nobody did anything. I think it was Turkey that has troops in northern Syria, creating a buffer zone with the Kurds. Turkey was heavily involved in Idlib, supporting the anti-Assad forces there, and the Turkish work in northern Israel was not approved by NATO. When Russia and Turkey had their little brouhaha, where Russian aircraft hit a Turkish convoy, Turkey turned to NATO. NATO's like, not our fight. And I also want to remind people that Turkey played a very big role in Azerbaijan's war against Armenia. And that's the one we need to take a closer look at, because Tom Barak has been working with the Turks about this southern corridor. There's a name for the gap, but it's basically creating a corridor between between Turkey and Nakhchivan, which is Azerbaijani enclave in the main part of Azerbaijan, that would cut through southern Armenia along the Iranian border. And the Iranians have said this would be a casus belli if you did this. Trump went in and talked about the creation of some sort of highway named after himself. But the point is, the United States and Turkey have been working very closely on regional issues. This is why Donald Trump went to Ankara in early July. He didn't go there because of NATO. Donald Trump despises NATO. Donald Trump hates NATO. Donald Trump went there because he respects Erdogan, because he's been working with Erdogan behind the scenes, which is another thing we have to realize. One of the reasons why Tom Barak is so upset is that Israel, by this action, is upsetting the quiet diplomacy taking place behind the scenes. Turkey has been an ongoing supporter of various activities done by Israel. I just mentioned the close ties between Turkey and Azerbaijan, the very close ties between Turkey and Azerbaijan. The largest Mossad station outside of Israel is in Azerbaijan. Israel has been using Azerbaijan as a launch pad against Iran. Much of the attacks that took place were coordinated from Azerbaijani territory. Israeli aircraft flew through Azerbaijan to attack Tehran out of the Caspian Sea during the 12-day war. So any notion that Israel and Turkey are not hand in glove is just absurd in the extreme. This is great theater being played out by Erdogan. Turkey has no intention whatsoever of going to war against Israel. I don't know. I mean, I know why Israel's doing this, because Netanyahu has an election coming up, a very critical election that he may lose. And Netanyahu has to continue to portray himself as the great security man. And the Israelis have articulated that Turkey is the greatest threat to Greater Israel Project, a greater threat than Iran in many cases. And so we see Erdogan making noises about Israel, and we see Israel making noises about Turkey, but there's no intention whatsoever of either of these two regional allies. And I'm going to underscore that, because these are regional allies. They behave as allies. They don't behave as enemies. And there's no intention of either of these nations to go to war with one another. Again, I lament that, because Israel is a genocidal, maniacal state that deserves to have everything coming to it. And Turkey would be a nation capable of delivering that if they had a leader who could follow through on his rhetoric, but Erdogan's not going to follow through.
Sort of like what Vietnam did in 1979 by invading Cambodia to stop the genocide. there. That's the role. You say Iran is playing more of that role to put the Israel project in check than Turkey
However,
ever will.
Iran has a
Yeah.
constitution that requires them to do this. I mean, it's not like the Iranians are their constitution requires them to support the state of Palestine. They're the only nation in the world that has that kind of legal responsibility. They don't get the credit that they deserve for such a noble stance.
Mhm. Let me ask a question, Joe and Scott. This so-called Mecca Accord that Turkey is part of, as well as Pakistan and Iran. What? How does that play into all this? Is that just window dressing?
Joe, do you want to tackle that
No,
first?
no,
You
go
want?
ahead, Scott. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to point out some absurdities in this. One, um, Qatar and Saudi Arabia hate each other. I think we understand that. There's a lot of animosity there. There was a lot of talk a couple of years ago about Saudi Arabia perhaps intervening militarily with Qatar because of how Qatar was posturing itself regionally. Um, Turkey has a major military installation in Qatar. Thousands of Turkish troops are there to protect Qatar from Saudi Arabia. Those troops are still there. The animosity between Qatar and Saudi Arabia still exists. So understand the stupidity of this pact. This pact is meaningless. This pact has no teeth, none whatsoever. Pakistan and Saudi Arabia a couple of years ago asked Pakistan to send a division to help them out in Yemen, and Pakistan said pound sand. And that's when the United Arab Emirates had to step in and offer billions of dollars to underwrite the Pakistani economy. Now, Pakistan, the UAE has since withdrawn that because of Pakistan's role in mediating a ceasefire, or as a mediator for Iran. This pact is non-existent. There's no teeth to it. There's no I just would ask people, in NATO, and Ray knows this, Joe, you know this as well. I mean, in the 1970s and 80s, I mean, you could take a German battalion, plug it out of a German division, plug it into an American division, and then they would function because they trained together. They had the same doctrine, the same logistics, the same everything. They talked the same language. They trained actively together. NATO was literally a pact at that time that could do. Not today. Today's a joke. You can't. There's no intermingling. It won't work. They'll all die. But back in the day, it was a real military pact. When was the last time a Turkish battalion trained alongside a Saudi Arabian battalion? Never. How about the Pakistani army? I mean, the real Pakistani army sitting there hooking and jabbing with the Saudis and the Turks to their left and their right. Never. This is a non-functional military alliance. It exists in name only. This military alliance will never, ever see joint combat together as it's currently configured. This was an act of desperation to fill a political vacuum that exists because of the diminishment of America's military posture in the region. This vacuum has removed a security blanket that had been draped over the region for decades, and there's people who are feeling vulnerable. And so they came together for this little military pact, but it's just a non-functional, geopolitical wet dream. There's nothing to it.
Ray, anything to add to that?
Well, I'm glad I asked. The way I saw it, the Saudis were looking desperately for friends and persuaded the Paks and the Turkeys to do this little arrangement, which has little, if no meaning, as you suggest, Scott.
Ray's much more concise than I am, but that's why he gets to brief presidents and I don't.
I see. Okay. So the idea that this is an electable ploy was raised by both Turkey and I can't someone else, but there's a
Israel.
billboard. Sorry,
If you're
somebody. Oh,
talking,
Barack. Yeah, Barack and Turkey both said that this was just an electoral ploy by Israel. But I mean, I wonder because they would like to go to war. They'd like to stop Turkey. And we're not dealing with rational people leading Israel at the moment. They are. They've gone completely mad. They've seized this as the opportunity to fulfill Ben-Gurion's dream of the greater Israel, and they've made great strides in Gaza in particular. They're kind of stopped in Lebanon, and the Iranians have given them a bloody nose. There's no question about that. But so you wonder if they learn lessons like that. So I wonder if it's not more than an electoral ploy. But there is a billboard. I just want to raise this. The FT reports that ahead of the 27 October election, which Netanyahu is very much likely to lose at the moment anyway, his Likud party has erected campaign billboards around the country in Israel showing Erdogan alongside Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei of Iran, Hezbollah leader Naim Qassem, and New York Mayor Zohran Mamdani. And the quote is, they want Netanyahu to lose, the billboard says. Don't let them win. Boy, Mamdani's become elevated to a world leader on the side of Israeli motorways.
But Joe, just real quick, what happens if Turkey cuts off the Azerbaijani oil?
Well, when are they going to do it?
No. But what I'm saying is, this is why it's an electoral ploy. Because if Israel wants a war, not only would Turkey deliver a fatal blow militarily, but all they have to do is hit the off switch. And there is no alternative to Azerbaijani oil at this point in time. The Israeli economy is already teetering on the edge of disaster. It's being propped up through artificial means and things of this nature. But you remove oil, energy from Israel, and it collapses. So that's why I think that there's just politics being played. I mean, it's stupid politics. I mean, that billboard itself just suggests how utterly childlike this posturing is. But no one's been able to tell me where Israel would get oil if Turkey hit the off switch. I mean, is Saudi Arabia suddenly going to say, "Oh yeah, all those ships we can't send through Bab el-Mandeb because the Ansarallah has shut it down. We'll send them up to you, Israel. Don't worry about it. You got it, baby. We'll cover you." I mean, I don't think the Saudis are ready to jump in and help out. I don't think that anybody in the Gulf is ready. Maybe the United Arab Emirates would, but how are they going to get it there? So that's why I think it's very much an election ploy.
What about the United States? Trump's boasting they're the biggest producer of oil, surpluses. He's controlling the world oil market, et cetera, et cetera. They could send tankers. I don't know if they have LNG ports in Israel, but they certainly, or U.S. could ship oil there, couldn't it?
Let's see it happen. I mean, that would be a wonderful example of American-Israeli friendship.
I guess it would be.
I mean, who's going to pay for it? Because Israel's not going to pay for it.
Well, we're all three Americans here. We pay taxes.
I'm happy to pay
We're
for
gonna
it. Anything for the Israelis. I mean,
they've already taken it out of your
need?
salary, Ray. They've already taken it out of our salary. The oil money. You kidding me? Really don't have
my
a choice.
retirement.
Your retirement.
I think you're going to find that U.S. oil is far more over leveraged than maybe Trump is acknowledging. You have to be careful with social media. I mean, because Trump does post some really ridiculous things, and all that. But he tends to believe that because the Strait of Hormuz isn't fully functioning, he says, well, we have the alternative. It's American oil. American oil is the alternative. But last time I checked, there's a finite amount of it. I mean, we do produce a lot of it. We use a lot of it on our own, but we sell it. But just because you're selling oil, I mean, I could go out and farm corn all day, but when I run out of corn, just because I have a sign outside that says cheap sweet corn, 1 nickel, doesn't mean I got cheap sweet corn anymore. It's not a bottomless supply of American oil. So, do we have the oil to give to Israel? Last time I checked, it was our strategic oil reserves that were drawn to dangerously low levels. So I asked the question, where would Israel get oil if Turkey hit the off switch? And I think the answer right now is nobody knows, and that makes it very dangerous for Israel.
Now, while Turkey may only be interested in northern Syria, continuing its influence there, the troops that are there, the ability to stop the Kurds, the Syrian Kurds as well, certainly joining up with the Iraqi Kurds, their big nightmare, and their own Kurds, and also Idlib provinces where all the jihadists were sent by Russia. I often question why that was done, why they were all sent there, and they eventually, years later, they were able to overthrow the government. And Russia lost that in the end, unbelievably. Somehow Assad fell. So Israel certainly has territorial designs on Syria. Their troops are really on the outskirts almost of Damascus. Will they move, Scott, on Damascus? And is Turkey, would they do anything about that? I guess you'd say no.
Well, I mean, now we're getting into a different a different thing. I don't think Israel's going to move on Damascus. I don't think they need to move on Damascus. They just want to make sure that the Turks aren't in Damascus any more than they already are with their proxy Jolani. The United States has worked hard to intercede on behalf of Israel with Jolani, meaning, I mean, just imagine an American president shaking hands with a known Al Qaeda operative with American blood on his hands, and saying nice things about this guy. There's only one reason to do that, and that is to, salve the concerns of Israel. Because I think when Jolani's brutish thugs rolled into Damascus, and again, I was talking to some people. I guess it wasn't Jolani's people that rolled in first. It was actually even more pro-Turkish groups that rolled in, and Jolani came in afterwards. So Turkey's been in control of Syria for, politically, or at least was positioned to have control. And it's been in the United States, it's made a concerted effort to intervene and create sort of an American buffer between Israel and Turkey. But a key aspect of that is Israel can't push it too far. The Israeli forces occupying Damascus would be that would trigger a regional response that Turkey simply couldn't ignore, which is why I think it's not going to happen. Remember, Turkey bombed an empty airfield. I mean, there might have been some Syrians there, but the Turks had already said, we're not going in. We understand that this causes you a problem. So Israel bombed.
Israel bombed. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Israel bombed it. The Turks were like, yeah, we're not going there. Don't worry about it. Send the message. Tell them no big deal. And the Israelis went, yeah, but we got to have an active theater right now. We got an election coming up. We got to blow things up. They can go boom. And they did. And I think the Turks know this. I think this is just, like I said, I just think this is all just an act of theater. But it's dangerous because what if they do something silly? But I just don't see there's any danger of Israel moving on Damascus at this point in time. Jolani's crowd is in check. And Turkey has no intention of pushing the envelope. You hit the nail on the head. The Turks' number one priority right now is not putting Turkish troops on the Israeli border. The Turks' number one priority is the Kurds, and dealing a death blow to the Kurds right now. The Kurds are sort of back on their heels. I don't know if people have been watching, but Iran's been pummeling the living dog poop out of again, stand with America and die. So all the Kurds that sat there and allowed America to build them up and beef them up to be this force of intervention in Iran, America just abandoned them, and we're leaving Erbil, and the Kurds are getting slaughtered. So
America abandoning Kurds? I never heard that one before.
Again?
Kurds are the pawn of history. I mean, if you need a good example of why it's not such a good idea to join forces with America until they don't need you anymore, the Kurds are example A. It's just so sad, really, because they deserve their own country. They never got it, and that had to do with big power manipulation.
Ray, let me ask you this. Scott said that the Trump administration shaking hands with Jolani. Well, it goes back to the Obama administration shaking hands with the likes of Jolani, the Syrian rebels. They backed them. We know that. The Turks were helping. Israel was helping. The Gulf states were certainly helping. They all got in on that. And now that it's over, Israel is trying to say that they're afraid of this Islamist regime in Damascus. Is that a load of what or what?
Well, it is. I was thinking it was the CIA that's working with what they call them, the good terrorists, not the bad terrorists, the good terrorists. They're halfway up Syria, and then the U.S. Army and others are working with. Well, Scott probably knows more about this, with the bad terrorists. But finally, all they came together. What I was thinking about was how Iran has bombed the living stuff out of some of those bases, some of which were used to train these benign nice terrorists, okay? Those were the ones that chopped off the head, but caught the blood right away, okay, and put it in disposal bags. That was Jolani, and they won. That was really interesting that the Russians hung on for a while, but they're out of there as far as I'm concerned. They have certain rights in Latakia, I guess. But, that was a win for Turkey and for Jolani, and not for too many other people. Now, Israel's, of course, going to try to take advantage of that, but I agree with Scott. There are limits to what they can do. Witness what they're taking from Hezbollah now and trying to suppress them. They're not going to be able to succeed at that. So it seems to me they can't spread themselves all that thin, no matter how much they desire a greater Israel at this point.
But Scott, are they comfortable with Jolani being in power? They have some kind of influence over him if through the U.S. They're not really afraid of the Syrian regime, are
No,
they?
no.
Yeah.
I mean, no, absolutely. They fear Hezbollah with good reason. They fear Iran with good reason. They fear Ansarallah with good reason. They fear the People's Militia units in Iraq with good reason. They don't fear Jolani. Jolani is an Israeli ally. Jolani's part of again, I just want to remind, I'm doing a project. I don't want to speak too much about it yet because it's not fully formed, but it deals with Syria. But I started, putting out feelers, and I wanted to talk to the Turks about. I mean, you just raised a question. Assad fell. Why? How? How did this happen? How did this come about? And the thing is, I mean, Ray knows this. Sometimes questions or you put out a list of your essential elements of information. It gives away the farm on what your collection capabilities are and how people respond. Gives you insights into things. I'll just say this, that the Turks were working with the Israelis all along about what was happening in Idlib. The Israelis were fully, in my opinion, briefed, and were um, and there was active coordination, not just with them, but also with Jordan. Never forget that Jordan had this big CIA operation running, next to Dara, and that was one of the vectors of influence. So you had Idlib, you had Dara, then you had the Israelis coming through Golan. This was all a singularity. This wasn't three separate fronts by three. The Israelis, the Jordanians, and the Turks were working hand in glove with the United States to remove Bashar al-Assad from power. And so this is just theater. Israel put him in power. They were part of the process that put him in power. So they're not afraid of him at all. This is just garbage. Now they're a little frustrated because they wanted their Jolani pawn to make a move on Hezbollah. They wanted Jolani to come in through Syria and threaten Hezbollah, and Jolani said no, and so there's some frustration there that their little puppet isn't doing what they want to do, but they don't fear Jolani. They don't fear anything out of Syria because they created it.
Let's move on to Gaza for a moment. One of the real estate developments was in the region this week. We're talking about Jared Kushner. He met with Hamas and he met with Netanyahu. And then the bombing continued. More people have been killed. Israel continues to take territory there. Of course, Netanyahu said he rejected Trump's plan. And so we were in a deal, something like what happened with the IRA in Britain for so many years, that the IRA said they would disarm once British troops withdrew from Northern Ireland. And that's basically the same thing here. Unless Israel withdraws, Hamas will not disarm, and Israel will not withdraw unless Hamas disarms. Well, is there any solution to this, or are we going to just see continued killing and using the opportunity, Israel, to continue to take more and more of that yellow line, keep pushing it further deeper into Gaza? Scott?
I mean, this is a tough one. I mean, Hamas and the Palestinian people have suffered so much in the cause of a Palestinian homeland. Um, and, they they're in a tough situation right now. I can't speak for Hamas as to why they have agreed to, move in this peace plan, but I think the answer is they need the killing to stop. Um, they are buying into a process as imperfect as it is, uh, because they there's nothing to be gained by killing. By allowing Israel to continue to kill, although that is what Israel is doing. It's got to be frustrating for Hamas because nobody treats them with respect. I mean, the whole Trump 15-point plan is just an absolute insult to Hamas, and because nobody believes for a second the United States is going to do anything that's beneficial for the Palestinian people. It's all 100% about Jared Kushner making money with his Israeli partners. The United States is not a viable broker of peace, but the Hamas has no other option. I have to believe that Hamas is holding on to, because again, we need to respect the following. Hamas knows Israel better than we do. If you remember Sinwar, the man who was killed, the head of Hamas, he was in an Israeli prison and he wrote a book about his experiences, but it was well recognized that he understood the psychology of the Israelis better than the Israelis did themselves. And I believe that the Hamas leadership and the people in Gaza also know the Israelis very well. And I have to believe they are looking at Israel and sensing strategic weakness on the part of Israel, that if you allow this imperfect peace process to drag on, that eventually Israel will break from within. And you see hope, inklings of this. Kushner's talking to Netanyahu, but what happens if Netanyahu loses in October and one of the opposition comes in who are talking about the necessity of resolving Gaza in a different manner? Now suddenly Hamas has more cards to play. So I think this is what's going on. I think this is a very frustrating game of weight on the part of Hamas. They're not trying, they don't have any hope that this peace process is going to work. There's an element of desperation on the part of Kushner and Netanyahu because, again, what is Kushner's motivations? Do you think he's really trying to help the children of Gaza? Or is he just trying to make money? I think he's trying to make money. We know what his motivations are. And then you have Netanyahu, who's just desperate. If he loses in October, what's his future? I mean, he's already indicted. He's on trial for corruption. The only reason why they haven't convicted him, put him behind bars, is because he's prime minister. If he's no longer prime minister, that's problematic. So this is just a muddled mess because neither the United States nor Israel nor any of the so-called partners of peace are serious about resolve. And I will say this, and I'll leave it to Ray to clean up my mess. None of the Arabs are serious about peace as well. And this is the frustrating part for Hamas. They are truly alone. They have no partners for a legitimate Palestinian state other than Iran. Iran is their only partner. But it's the Arabs that live it. Egypt is not a partner. Jordan is not a partner. Saudi Arabia is most definitely not a partner. None of the Gulf Arab countries are partners. Turkey's not a partner. There are no partners for Hamas in this mess. Hamas is truly alone other than Iran. And Iran has already done everything it can possibly do. I mean, it's gone to war. I think we're like Iran. I think Hamas is in a waiting game. How do you solve the Israeli problem? And maybe you let the Israeli problem solve itself by collapsing from within. In October, a bad election result for Netanyahu could be the beginning of a process that leads to policy change within Israel. That's my take.
Scott, there's no mess to clean up here, but I'd like to take your reference to Iran to the next step here. There is an arc of resistance now. I was amazed that the Iranians were principled enough to include Lebanon, and now they've included Palestine and Yemen. And as you point out, the fat and happy Gulfies, the Arabs up there and the Arabs in Egypt and elsewhere, they don't give a rat's patootie about what happens to the Palestinians, and they never have. But now they have to. So I see that as a sort of extraneous but relevant factor here, because Hamas, might live in hope that things really change this fall in many ways. And if the Iranians are able to face down the U.S., well, that will mean something. And maybe even the Gulfies may not come around with any money, but they're not going to cooperate to the extent they have with the U.S. and with Israel in the future. So I see that they might be playing a temporizing game, as you suggest, and partly because of the hope that they have this time that someone is coming to their aid. What, for strategic or for cynical? No, because the resistance is clear. The resistance is resistance to occupation. The occupation started in 1967, for God's sake, and the Israelis still occupy these territories under international law. Not only is the resistance entitled to resist, but they're entitled to resist with weapons. That's international law. So here comes along a country that could face down the United States. Who knows what's in the offing? I think that gives Hamas a little bit more to hope for.
I just want to add, Ray, you know, Naftali Bennett, the notorious former prime minister, war criminal of Israel, a coward. Oh, come on, Scott. He was a commando. Yeah, he was a commando who panicked under fire and led to artillery fire being called in on refugees hiding in a UNIFIL base, slaughtering them. Naftali Bennett, that war criminal, that coward. He has now come out and said that Israel is more isolated than ever. He actually said, "We have lost the United States." And this, I think, might add to some of the what you're talking about. The Israeli, again, this is anecdotal, but in my neighborhood, which is a nice little suburb outside of Albany, full of good-hearted liberal people, they're wonderful. Oh man, they just believe in all the good causes, and they're just. My wife and I go walking every morning because that's necessary at my age to exercise the arthritic knees. But we go walking, and around our neighborhood, there were multiple signs that said, "We stand with Israel." Do you know how many "We stand with Israel" signs are still up in my neighborhood? None.
Whoa.
And I know some of the homes where they were are staunch pro-Israeli people, but it's no longer politically viable because if you have a sign in front of your yard that says "We stand with Israel," what you're saying is we stand with genocide. And there's no question. We stand with Ben Gavir. We stand with the rape of prisoners. We stand with a man who says it's okay to murder 14 and 16-year-old boys. We stand with a man who says we must kill 40 to 50 of them a night just because. You can't stand with Israel today. Yes, Israel lost the United States. I'm hoping that it's permanently, and they're losing the world. Israel is becoming truly isolated, a despicable regime of despicable people who stand for despicable things. And it's no longer, anti-Semitic to say, because it's the truth. It's the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So help me God. Israel is a despicable, genocidal state that has lost every right to exist in its current configuration, and the world is recognizing this. So that might be another thing that Hamas is holding on to. If they can outlast the genocidal maniacs and have the world finally come to them. And I'm not talking about the Arab world because I have no. Look, you've heard me speak about the Gulf Arab nations. I can no longer travel through Dubai or Abu Dhabi or Kuwait or any place because I'd probably be arrested because I view them as nothing but a bunch of fat, pathetic, criminally minded perverts, but who have no legitimacy. But it's they're not ever going to rally to the support of Gaza. The Palestinians will need the world to rally to their support, and it'll be a world defined by Iran's example, not anybody else's example.
How many Ukrainian flags are left in your neighborhood, Scott?
My wife and I were talking about that too. Just today, we're driving back, and there was one place that had a Ukrainian flag, but they left it out too long, and it got ripped, and so it's in half and tatters. And I thought it was very symbolic that there's no Ukrainian flags left flying either. So.
Ray.
let me take this just one step farther, if I may. It's just 25 years before Netanyahu was caught on a video, which he thought was turned off. But when the woman of the house said, now, Bibi, aren't you afraid that we'll just be isolated if we do what you're going to do to the Palestinians? And what about world opinion? And he said, world opinion, for God's sake, no, all we worry about is the Americans. And we can bend the Americans in any situation where we want. Actually, 80% of the Americans will support us no matter what we do. That is absurd. Period. End quote. Well, it was absurd, but it was true then. Okay. Now, not so much. So there's that healthy atmosphere here. The other thing is, well, let's just continue and say, yeah, support for Israel is less than 50%, seems to me now, of course, according to the latest polls. But there's the NDAA. Now, I'm not up on that. I know it passed the House. Is it in conference now, Scott or Joe? Do you know? Is it going to pass the Senate? Because that would bring things back to worse than before. Is the
I
Senate
think that was a
about to?
reaction to what you're describing, by the way. That NDA is because of the loss of support in the U.S. But anyway, Scott, I don't know the answer to that.
I think it's. I actually think it's in the Senate. I don't. The Senate version has not passed, and I
Okay.
think that our founding fathers actually were wise. They weren't perfect. We know that because of slavery and other things. But when they created this constitutional republic that I love so much, as imperfect as it is, they picked the Senate. They designed the Senate to be a slow, deliberative body that was supposed to serve as a break to the hot-tempered passion of the House. 2 years electoral cycle, the House, the passion of the people. But the Senate was supposed to say, whoa, wait a minute. We're not under the same electoral pressure that you are. And I think looks like this is the Senate doing the right thing, because I think there's people in the Senate, no matter how corrupt they are, and they all are corrupt, who understand institutionally what this NDAA would do to America, and they understand the risks that are entailed, especially.
Say a word about that, Scott, just in case our audience that isn't familiar with what actually the NDA would do now with respect to Israel and us.
Well, Section 219, which is the version of the House that the House passed of the NDA, basically blurs the line that exists between the United States and Israel when it comes to the sharing of critical technologies, collaboration on defense industries. It's not what people think in terms of it brings the United States military together with the IDF. It's not that, but it is that, because militaries aren't necessarily militaries don't function in terms of the immediacy of joint command, the influence of the command. You can have two separate, an American battalion, an Israeli battalion, and there's a Chinese firewall there, meaning the American can't give orders to the Israeli, and the Israeli can't give orders to the Americans. Fine, that's great. Yay, we separated them. But now, as you go down and you take a look at questions of doctrine, and doctrine is linked to technology, and linked to research and development, and linked to intelligence secrets and data, and defense industrial bases, and suddenly all this gets blended in, and what you realize is that it's the same goop down here that percolates up to create these two battalions. It's the same goop. And they are the same battalions. They are working. They literally are mirror images of each other, to include the morality, because part of this, when you talk about technologies and you talk about the development of weapon systems, et cetera, there's a moral underpinning that goes into that, the thinking that goes into that, especially when we speak of AI, artificial intelligence, which this will bring them in. The Israelis will dominate this. The Israelis already have the Lavender program. They already have the Gospel program. They already have Who's Daddy? Who's Your Daddy? Do the Americans understand what Who's Your Daddy is? Who's Your Daddy is where they follow somebody in, and kill all their family members, because that's what the Israelis do. They're murderous, genocidal thugs. They're not good people, ladies and gentlemen. These are the world's worst people because they come up with AI-driven programs like Lavender and Gospel and Who's Your Daddy. And yet this will now become part of America. We will now be doing this.
Yeah,
and so now,
yeah, and this would be better than $4 billion a year, right? In other words, the
it's free money.
Israelis just has you know, 3.8 billion bucks a year is what we're giving them. This would be even better or more effective, correct?
This is more like giving them $100 billion. Because now they will be in control of our R&D budget. So everything will be shared. There's no Chinese wall. Everything will be shared. Now the Senate version, section 1217, I think it is, modifies some of the language about how it's overseen, et cetera. And so they're incompatible. And so now the Senate hasn't voted on this yet. So at some point in time, there will have to be a conference, and the differences we work out. But there's some in the Senate they're just dragging this out in an effort to actually kill it. And I hope they do that. And you know, the people aren't also there. There's another part. It's not in the NDA because that's defense, but in our classified intelligence budget, there's a similar section about intelligence sharing. And I just want to remind people that, you know, Jonathan Pollard stole some of those critical national secrets and gave it to the Israelis, who then sold it to the Soviet Union to get Jews freed. So they took the most sensitive communications and electronic warfare and signals intelligence, gave it to the Soviets at a time when we were Cold War enemies. Some of the information they gave dealt with nuclear war planning. And the Israelis, our friends and allies, sold it to the Soviets to get Jewish immigrants released. They're not our friends. We recognize Pollard to be the spy that he was, a despicable spy. I wish there had been a death penalty. I'm not normally a proponent of the death penalty, but somebody deserved death, it would be him. But instead, we paroled him. He's in Israel now, treated as a hero. And so that to avoid any embarrassments like this in the future, where Israeli liaison officers in Washington, D.C. are recruiting spies amongst the intelligence community, we've just decided to remove the Chinese wall and allow secrets to be given to the Israelis as a matter of course. And that's what is happening there. So if you're not disgusted by this, then you're not an American. I mean, literally, Israel is not the friend of the United States. People need to understand that. You spoke about Bibi Netanyahu, the absolute dismissive attitude he has towards American democracy and the Constitution should be an alarm to everybody. The Israelis spy on us, the counterintelligence community. You should talk to Joe Ken about this some point. The counterintelligence community raised the classification of Israel, the threat from Israel to critical. It's a critical threat to the national security. That's Israel today. Israel right now, as we speak, is a critical threat to the national security of the United States because of their ongoing espionage. The espionage is primarily focused on two things: policymaking and research and development related to defense industries. And we are literally doing away with any. So the Israelis Congress is aiding and abetting espionage against the United States of America. There is no better definition of treason than this. There's my explanation of the NDA.
Scott, let me ask you about the genesis of the NDA. You recall Netanyahu on a 60 Minutes segment a couple of months ago saying, we're not going to ask for American military aid anymore. We're going to be sufficient. We speculated that he would go to UAE or somewhere else. And because he understood how Israel's losing support, hemorrhaging support, maybe the only silver lining in this genocide is that. Now, is this NDAA a response to that? So rather than Israel having to come with a begging cup saying, I want aid, give us a separate aid allocation, that it will become part of the defense budget. Is that right, or am I wrong about that? They will actually become integrated with the U.S. funding for their own military.
You're 100% correct. This is a workaround for that. And, you know, gosh, while you were speaking, I had a brilliant flash come through my mind, and it just they're probably getting older, Joe. Is that, you
Oh,
have these
you're telling me I'm going to be 70 in 3 days. So go
Praise
on.
God.
A
Well,
day
good to
after
find
Ray
you guys.
becomes a day after Ray's birthday is mine. But anyway, go on.
While you get that back, Scott, let me just pick up what you talked about having to do with the founding fathers. George Washington, what he spoke out in his farewell address so beautifully and so directly, entangling alliances, passionate attachments to one country where you serve their interests rather than your own. Now, he was talking about the French. The French were beating on us. Look, we helped you win the revolution. Now you got to help us against these hated British. And Washington and Jefferson and Quincy Adams said, forget about it. We're going to stay here. We're going to develop our own country until 1898 when we had a different breed of cat in. They said, oh, no, let's expand it. That only happened very, very narrowly. There are a lot of people who were against that kind of thing. So anyhow, when you think back to the perspicaciousness of our founding fathers and how in their very solemn documents, they thought it necessary to warn about precisely this. And I'll just say one more time, I'm really worried about the next 2.5 months before the elections in November, because I think we may be kissing 250 years of the Republic goodbye. It's been great, right? But I think the chances are better than even that the reason that Trump doesn't give a patootie about he doesn't, I mean, he picks up a fight with the Pope, for God's sake. I mean, you don't do that if you want to win a by-election. So I'm worried that with ICE and with National Guard and with Hegseth quite willing to salute and put our armed forces on the line, I think the election is in great jeopardy. Better than even, I give those odds. And so, that was the time for us to be winter soldiers, or in this case, autumn soldiers, and come to the fore and prevent this. And I don't know exactly how, I'm talking with our Veterans for Peace on this. We have to make sure we put our bodies into it if that's necessary. And I fear this time we have about 2 months to do that. And I fear it is necessary.
Well,
Yeah,
Ray, you're talking. Go ahead.
go ahead.
Go ahead,
I
Scott.
just want to say, just to reinforce what the danger of what Ray, because now this is what I'm going to talk about. If I were to take and I think I need to say this up front. I don't have access to classified information today, and if I did, I wouldn't be talking about it here live on TV. But the human brain is the human brain. If I learned how to do open brain surgery, 30 years ago, the tools may have changed, but the brain's the same. And so I could, talk intelligently about open brain surgery today. I used to do this kind of stuff for a living. I was pretty good at it. If I were to map out Israel's efforts to acquire sensitive American technology, because that's one of their primary things. They're everywhere. Ladies and gentlemen, the Israelis are everywhere. They are here collecting things you don't even know what they're collecting. Everything. And they are trying to gain access to sensitive technologies, sensitive research, etc. So that's what the U.S. counterintelligence community is supposed to be protecting ourselves from, and they do. We have counterintelligence elements out there seeking to create a barrier to block Israel from doing this. Now, if you compare what we're trying to prevent the Israelis from getting, and then you go to the NDAA and see what we're giving them access to, it's literally the exact same thing. If you overlay it over each other, Congress is facilitating Israel's acquisition of all the sensitive secrets that we have been blocking Israel from getting because we view them as a critical threat to our national security. So it's literally the most treasonous thing you can imagine. Anybody in Congress who's supporting this is committing an act of treason against the American people. But now we take it to Ray, because Ray, I agree with you. I mean, you have more faith in people than I do, the American people. I've lost all faith in the American people. I just think that we've wrapped ourselves in cocoons of commercialized, consumerism cocoons, and we just don't want to rock that. We just disappear in the cocoon, pull out our cell phones, and watch whatever it is that entertains us at the moment, and forget about the world we live in. But we do have a Congress. And we see, as we just talked about with the NDAA in Section 1217, the Senate, we see every once in a while Congress wakes up and goes, whoa, this can't happen. This would be the end of Congress, which they should understand. And then we also have governors. Remember, the states actually do play a big role in this wonderful experiment we call American democracy. And I think it's at the governor level and the congressional level that we must get this pushback against Trump. But now, Seymour Hersh, who, Cy, if you're watching, I'm trying to repair my relationship with Cy because even though I was critical of him, I did it in a way that friends shouldn't be doing it to friends. But he just, in typical Seymour Hersh fashion, wrote an article that I think everybody should talk about. And you could correct me, Ray, if I'm getting any of this wrong, but he spoke of things called COGS, continuity of government, and then something called PAD, I think it's Presidential Emergency Action Directives or something of that nature. And when I read what Cy wrote, I mean, I was aware of this, but what it suddenly occurred to me is Congress is punted already, meaning they're even if Congress wanted to oppose a Trump move to interfere with the midterm elections, they can't because they already gave him all the authority he needs with these secret presidential directives. All the president has to do is unilaterally declare an emergency to exist, and then he can deploy. Now, the military may say no, and I believe the military would. I think the president would be a fool to turn to the military because, believe it or not, even though Pete Hegseth is a testosterone-infused moron, there are people in the military who still have a constitutional conscience. But this is why he created ICE, and this is why he exercised ICE effectively across the country, deploying Department of Homeland Security to literally invade and occupy American cities. This was a test run, and the nation failed because we allowed it to happen. And so now it comes to the governors, and the big challenge is going to be when the president seeks to nationalize the National Guard. This is where the rubber meets the roads, and this is going to be, I mean, because the Congress can punt on its responsibilities, but Congress cannot punt on the responsibilities of the governors of the states of the United States of America. And the governors can't put a bayonet in the ground and say, no, this will not stand. And they can refuse unconstitutional orders. And if the president seeks to nationalize the National Guard in a manner which seeks to interfere with, because elections are a matter of the state. States run their elections, not the federal government. And so this is where I think I'm hoping that governors, because Congress is punted. I think Congress has already given the president the ability to do what he wants. This could become interesting in a way that we don't want it to become interesting. Because, the people are incapable of mobilizing in the streets in any form that could realistically oppose the government. The National Guard is an organized military. They have a lot of weapons, and they're everywhere. And if the governors collectively say, Mr. President, this will not stand, we refuse to allow you to nationalize our militia. We will not allow you to take over, to steal this election. That's our only hope. That's our only hope. I'm hoping that now this is at the point where somebody has to come to the president and say, don't do this. Because if you do this, this could be a civil war. And we don't want a civil war. And then maybe they should show them the last 5 minutes of the movie called Civil War. And see what happens to the Trump-like president in that movie. I'm not articulating that. I believe in the Constitution. I don't believe in violence. But I'm just telling you right now, Ray, that the only bodies that are going to succeed in stopping the president from doing some sort of unconstitutional move would be the bodies that are wrapped in the uniform of the National Guard of various states.
In doing away with posse comitatus, Trump wants to grab the voters by the posse. And I think that has to be stopped. And the other thing I wanted to ask you, Scott, is you mentioned how the Israeli battalions and American battalions could be acting as one mirror. Will we see Israeli battalions on the streets of American cities helping to to disrupt the vote?
Well, in a way, we do, to be honest. One of the more disturbing things that Americans should actually take a look at is the degree to which Israel has infiltrated everything we do as a society. My Bethlehem Police Department attends training that's funded by the police union or whatever the hell they call themselves, but it's Israeli training. They bring in Israel. I mean, the whole concept of this again, America used to be a great place. I mean, I know we're not perfect, but America used to be a great place when cops looked like Andy Williams.
Barney Fife, yeah, Barney Fife.
I mean, Barney Fife didn't wear body armor and look like an assault trooper. Barney Fife wore a blue uniform and he had a pistol on his side. And
he tried to act like he did, though. He tried to act like he did have body armor. Yeah.
We had Andy Williams. Was it Andy Williams to hold him in check?
Andy Griffith.
Andy Griffith to hold him in check. But but I had a friend whose father was a chief of police, and he got in trouble because there was a guy that got involved in a domestic dispute, one of his cops, and the cop pulled a gun. And the chief of police showed up and talked it down. And then he told the guy to turn in his badge. And the guy said, "Why?" He was threatening me. He said, any man that is so afraid of the citizens that he goes for his gun first doesn't deserve to be a cop. You're a coward. Get out of here. But this is the whole thing. We have cops who are supposed to be cops. I mean, you get training, not good training, but you get training. Why do you have to view the American people as the enemy? And they do now. They go in with this whole concept of we must to engage with lethal force anytime we perceive a threat, as opposed to what I as a Marine have to do in certain combat situations is I can't even put a damn magazine in my weapon until I receive effective fire. Now I'm a Marine in combat, and you're telling me there's sometimes when the rules of engagement say I can't even, put in a magazine chambered around until an effective fire means somebody got hit. And you're telling me our cops now in America, not in the combat zone, in America, are allowed to go in with the presumption of ill intent and kill people without a threat manifesting itself because they were scared. This is Israeli thinking. This is 100% Israeli thinking. The Israelis have captured American policing, and they've captured it. The Israelis control training everywhere. When I was a hazmat responder, I went to all of the federal courses just to see what the hell the federal government was teaching about biology and chemistry and nuclear and all that stuff. And then you sit down, and because I was a weapons inspector and I had a certain background, I could sit down with the instructors and say, let's walk through your curriculum. How did you develop it? And every single one of them was influenced by Israel. Israel controls everything we do in this country. Everything we do in this country when it comes to security. Israel controls the police department of New York City. The intelligence sector of the police department of New York City is controlled by Israel. Israel controls everything about the state policing throughout this country. Israel already occupies this country. We don't need an Israeli battalion. All of our cops are Israelis already. They've been programmed to think like Israelis. And we as a nation are allowing this to happen. We have to purge this. I wrote an article a while ago that got, I likened Israel to the green wasp, and I likened America to the American cockroach. And I talked about how the green wasp is a parrot, lays the larva in, becomes a parasite that takes over the host. Ladies and gentlemen, Israel has laid the larva in us. They have taken over. They own us. We are the American cockroach, whatever Israel wants us to do. And there's a chance if the cockroach kicks enough, it can eject the larva and live. We have to start kicking, baby, or we're going to die.
I think there's definitely been a backlash against Israel. Is something I never thought we'd see. So we are talking with Ray McGovern and Scott Ritter. This is The World This Week. And I want to move on to another topic, Iran. This week, we had Marjorie Taylor Greene, who you and I met, Scott, in her office on Capitol Hill. And we were both came out of there impressed, thinking she was nuts. And we were really quite surprised about how she isn't nuts. She tweeted, I'm not saying I vouch for this tweet, but anyway, she tweeted on Monday or Tuesday this week. I'm trying to find it now. She said they are, quote, they are discussing using nuclear weapons on Iran in strategy meeting. They meaning the White House. Yes, you read that correctly. It's real. I'm not speculating. I know, and it's pure evil. And then Anthony Aguilar said that he was quite certain that B-61 tactical nukes were already in the region and would likely be used. Scott, what do you make of this? Are they seriously considering using, given the bind that Trump is in? He can't get out of this Iran mess. Are they seriously considering a tactical nuke in Iran?
I've been saying this forever. People got mad at me in the lead up to the war. I said I thought it was foolish for Iran to posture as a threshold nuclear state. Ray, you remember this. And I said the reason is the United States will use nuclear weapons against them without question. If Iran becomes a nuclear weapon state, we will use nuclear weapons against them, and it will be devastating. And we had positioned an Ohio-class submarine. The Colby Review isn't just about the B-61, which is the air-delivered bomb. There's different variants of it. Some penetrate more deeply than others. But we also have the W-76-2, a low-yield nuclear weapon that is delivered by the Trident missile on board an Ohio-class submarine. That allows a very high-velocity weapon to hit that can penetrate deeply and then use a nuclear blast to do damage. So we already have deployed the nuclear weapons. We already have the targeting done. The war plan has been done. I've been saying this from day one. But just because the capabilities have been put there and mapped out doesn't mean that the military is ready to use them. When the president asked for the Pentagon on two occasions, according to the media, to draft up actual, utilization, the Pentagon said pound sand. It's unconstitutional. That's why I believe in the constitutional consciousness of the U.S. military, because to use nuclear weapons is international law does come into play. Things about proportionality. Why are we using nuclear weapons? And and things of that nature. Right now, there's a scenario that has Iran having moved their 60% enriched uranium stock to a place called Pickaxe Mountain. Now, it's purely assessment. I don't have access to the intelligence, but I don't believe we know. I believe we're set because it used to be in Isfahan. I mean, that for a while there, remember the raid? We had enough confidence that it was in Isfahan that we actually sent a JSOC team in to try and get it, and that fell apart on a runway. Well, if it's in Isfahan, that's in a certain tunnel that's been sealed, and that tunnel remains sealed. So if we had a high degree of confidence that it was in Isfahan to launch a JSOC raid, and JSOC doesn't launch raids unless they have a high degree of confidence. Suddenly, why do we believe it's all in Pickaxe Mountain? Now, how did it get there? And nobody can answer that question, but it's just part of the frustration on the part of the Trump administration that Pickaxe Mountain is there, and the media's talked about Pickaxe Mountain, this giant slab, 250 meters of granite that nothing will penetrate, and there might be cascades, centrifuge cascades down there, and if they started ginning up, they could get warheads. Who knows what they could do? It's pure speculation, and but let's be clear here that we have the weapons, we have the plan, we know the targets. And this is where Iran has to be very careful. I mean, there's just a lot of pressure on people to say that Iran must, for instance, with all this stuff coming out. And this, I've become more and more of a, I met a gentleman named Andrei Ilnitsky. He's a Russian lieutenant general, used to be a senior advisor to Sergei Shoigu. And in 2021, 2023 time period, he started promulgating some analysis that sort of expanded on what we call hybrid warfare. He called it mental warfare. And he talks about how the West uses mental warfare to take over the mindset of populations and targeted sets. I'm a little concerned right now that what we're seeing here with the United States and this talk about Colby's, nuclear weapons and all that stuff, that we're deliberately trying to create a scenario where the Iranians feel threatened enough to say we have no choice, but now we have to create a nuclear deterrence. The moment they do that, let me just make this as clear as possible. The moment they do that, we will use nuclear weapons against Iran. The moment the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff goes from, hey guys, we don't have any evidence here, this would be a disproportional response to a non-existential threat, to, Iran is positioning to produce nuclear weapons, and we have certain indications that they're moving in that direction. We need to preempt it with nuclear weapons, because preemptive nuclear strikes is part of our policy. The chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff has already signed off on that when he agreed to not only the nuclear posture review, but the nuclear implementation plan. So I think we have a lot of psychological warfare going on right now. And I think people should be alert to this, that all this talk about an Iranian nuclear threat isn't because Iran has or is moving in that direction. It's so that we can justify, talking about the necessity of using nuclear weapons against Iran. And the more we talk about it, it echoes back into Iran, and the Iranians listen to this and say, we need to do something about this. And you already see that there are people in Iran today saying, we might be moving in that direction. Don't. Right now, I think it's clear the United States will not use nuclear weapons against Iran. As long as we cannot articulate a cognizable threat. As long as you have people like Tulsi Gabbard, although she's gone now, you're able to sit there and go, nah, it's there's nothing there. We can't use nuclear because the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff won't allow it. But the moment we go, yeah, we got some hard intelligence here, the Iranians are actually spinning up the centrifuges, and they've taken certain elements up to 92%, and they're moving towards weaponization. We will use nuclear weapons preemptively immediately. So I'm concerned about this. I don't think it's because Iran poses a threat today. I think we're actually playing a psychological warfare operation against the Iranians, trying to get them to move in that direction.
Ray?
Yeah, I see it as a 90% the fact that Donald Trump is completely unpredictable. He's not well psychologically, physically. You have to watch him talk about the reflecting pool for 15 minutes at a major press conference to realize that this is a person that he's not very rational about things. Now, if the Iranians and the Russians and the Chinese all look on this and come to the same conclusion that I do, and their psychological divisions tell them he's completely unpredictable, well, that's when you have to really, really be careful. And every time I'm on an Arab or Iranian program, I try to subtly suggest that you're doing just fine, okay? Don't sink one of those damn I know you can sink one of those aircraft carriers, but don't do it, for God's sake. Don't give him a reason to think that, okay, he can use his ace in the hole if he looks at it that way. So I think that the Iranians have the equivalent of a nuclear weapon. I'm not the only one that has said this, of course. They have the Strait of Hormuz, and now they have the Bab el-Mandab and the Red Sea. They've got the upper hand, okay? So as long as they're as cautious as Putin, for example, has shown himself to be, and Xi, as long as they don't irritate this unpredictable person, I think they'll be okay because they have the upper hand. Now, let's say these reports are right. I like Scott. There are two press reports talking about, General Kane said, no, well, we're going to talk about that. Well, I don't know how good they are. I do take more substance from Taylor Green. So let's say that Trump is deranged enough, and I guess that's the word, to authorize one of these nuclear tactical things, right? And he tells Hegseth, do it. And Hegseth tells Kane, not Kane, but he tells the commanders to do it. Will the commanders do it? Now, I noticed that our colleague, Larry Wilkerson, told one of his interviewers just yesterday, no, they won't do it. They won't do it. Larry knows a hell of a lot more about military deliberations at that stratospheric level than I do. Scott, you know more, maybe as much as Larry. Do you think that the uniformed military would say, no, that's an unconstitutional order, we won't do it? Or will they salute Hegseth and say, okay, we'll do it? Hate to put you on a spot like that, but what do you think?
It's very big. Thank you, Ray, for that. Look, Annie Jacobson wrote a book about nuclear war, and it's a damn good book, and everybody should read it. But what's interesting about that is that she interviewed a whole host of people who were involved in nuclear, the decision making, who would be involved in decision making should the decision to use nuclear weapons ever make it percolate up to the top. And her scenario was, of course, North Korea firing a missile that came in. So there was an active threat. And again, the reason why I'm bringing this up is that this isn't fiction. Annie Jacobson interviewed the actual people who were involved in this, and she goes through the processes of thinking and thought and confirmation and this and that. And what you realize is that even with a missile inbound to the United States, it's not an automatic thing. There is pushback, pushing back. So now we come to, this scenario. There is no imminent threat out of Iran, none whatsoever. And that's a big deal. That's a big deal in this deliberative process that Larry Wilkerson is intimately familiar with. Larry Wilkerson was one of the many people that Annie Jacobson talked about. So when Larry Wilkerson comes in and says this thing, it's not just, he's not just a reporter, reporting some whispered, aside somewhere, because people don't come out and talk. People who are involved in nuclear war planning don't come out and talk about it. You're not allowed to. But I think, he is very informed on this issue. And his posture mirrors that of other people who have been involved in that, who have talked about this. The notion that the President of the United States can pick up the phone and order the commander of Strategic Command to launch nuclear weapons and that this will be automatically obeyed is an absurdity in the extreme. We don't work that way. The people who work in the nuclear weapons field look, I had a very, 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 very minor role in this. I was in a nuclear capable field artillery unit. I ran the personnel reliability program, and I went through a number of drills where we were issued the it's a nuclear weapon and everything but the fissile core. I mean, it's the weapon. And just the processes involved in firing a single artillery round. I mean, it just is mind-boggling, ladies and gentlemen. It's not automatic. So I agree with Larry Wilkerson that the President of the United States, especially the military, is very keen on understanding the constitutionality of the order being given, which means they are attuned to the due diligence that is supposed to be applied when making a decision of this nature. The military is fully cognizant of the irrational aspect of Donald Trump's leadership. The military won't articulate it, but we know during Trump's first administration that General Milley and others were talking behind the scenes about how do we contain this madness, to include the potential of calling up the Chinese and saying, this ain't going to happen. Don't worry, whatever he says, this ain't going to happen. There are people who want to charge Milley with treason, but understand that Milley, is thinking the way that people who wear 4 stars think. The system that produced Miley produces the people who have 4 stars today. These people take this very seriously. They're not. Pete Hegseth is a failed battalion operations officer, an alcoholic who could not qualify for a security clearance today if he was run through the same screening process that you and I ran through 30 years ago. He couldn't qualify. He is disqualified, unable to have a security clearance. He jumped echelon to become the Secretary of Defense. He's not indicative of the mindset of the people who wear the stars. The people who wear the stars have a sense of responsibility to the nation and to the service. These people wear a uniform. They put on that uniform, and every morning that they put it on, there's a pride associated with that. This is me. This is who I am. I am this, and I am not going to disgrace this. So I think that we Americans can rest easy knowing that unless there is an imminent threat to the survival, the existential survival of the United States that would allow the consideration of proportionality in terms of the use of nuclear weapons, they're not going to let nuclear weapons be used. It just isn't going to happen. These are people who are serious about their country. They're not going to just throw away. And again, I just remember Buchanan, who was the J5, Rear Admiral Thomas Buchanan, when he spoke about we are prepared to have a nuclear exchange with Russia.
Right.
He said something interesting, though. He said, we can win, which I thought was interesting. But then he said, maybe it's time we be honest with the American people about what winning would look like. Because if the American people understood what we mean by winning, they would never allow any of this to happen. Because a nuclear war, and I just want to say this for all the listeners out there, if we win, it means that America no longer exists. We won't be a constitutional republic. We'll be a rump, militarized dictatorship where the survivors wish they were dead. That's what victory will look like. So basically, anybody who says we must use nuclear weapons to save the United States, understand this: you are literally burning the village down to save it. That's it.
A quick question. Who heads the strategic command now out there? Is it Omaha still? Who is it? Is it Hegseth that appointed the head of the strategic command?
No, the Secretary of Defense doesn't get to appoint. The president appoints, and it's the Senate has to confirm. So, it doesn't get to go and put his lackeys in. They have to go through Senate confirmation process. I don't know who is wearing 4 stars on that hat today, but I do know that because I've read, I've gone through confirmation hearing after confirmation hearing, the public record. Then there's also the one behind the scenes.
Right.
And the Senate takes it very seriously. They ask some very serious questions, and what they're looking for is continuity of policy. They're not looking for some, Pete Hegseth, recovered alcoholic, to come in and say, we can win a nuclear war, baby. Let me do it. That would be the Senate. We're not done.
But they got Hegseth in there. They voted for Hegseth, and knowing all these things, I think it'd be important to find out. Hegseth hasn't interfered in some admirals and some other high officials, getting them in really strategic places. And so, I guess we're kind of looking who's head of that command now, and whether he's a Hegseth buddy, because would that make a difference? Seems to me it does, but maybe that for the next time.
I will. I'm looking it up right now. The commander is a U.S. Navy Admiral Richard Correll, who was confirmed in 2025. So he is definitely a Bush boy.
Bush,
and I mean a Trump, meaning that Trump
right.
Appointed him. Let me see. He was deputy commander, so he understands the continuity of this, and his background. He seems to be a career nuclear dude as opposed to a Pete Hegseth womanizing alcoholic. So,
Thanks be to God.
yeah, that's just a superficial reading of the news there, Ray. I can't guarantee my assessment is correct, but just looking at his bio, it doesn't scream. For instance, General Kane, we know that he was retired as a 3-star and then brought back out of retirement and given a 4-star, so he jumped echelon. This guy doesn't appear to be that case.
Mhm. Thanks.
So, if it's all right with you guys, I'd like to move on to Ukraine briefly. Ray, can you give us an update on what's happening on the ground and in the air? And what do you think Russia's strategy is right now, in particular in relation to Odessa?
Well, they've bottled up Odessa. Uh, uh, Ukraine's only major export, of course, is grain and some steel, and none of it can get out of the Dnieper River now. That's new. That's pretty much a blockade in some sense. They're bombing the hell out of it. Putin bragged about that today at a Q&A that was arranged with his favorite journalist, Zarubin. Uh, Putin was very strong, but not overly defensive. He pointed out, look, we're escalating, but it's all a return. It's a response to the escalation that they're trying to do against us. Um, there's some very interesting stuff here. Let me just give you one or two quotes because this is just about 5 hours old. He says, look, we've stepped up the strikes in response to this reckless gamble that Ukraine is doing, and there'll always be a response. And most importantly, Glavny is what he always says, the adversary's actions have had no impact on the situation at the front. That's the biggie. Of course, we'll fix up our air defense, we'll make it better. And you ask about overtures. This is kind of interesting, so I'll go into this a little bit. What are the Kiev authorities doing in terms of making proposals and sounding you out? What the Kiev authorities are doing through intermediaries whose views we certainly respect, they're trying to extricate themselves from a situation that they provoked themselves. Now, some of the proposals are quite exotic. Exotic. I would say exotic, but неприемлемый, not acceptable. We are always open to dialogue on peace, but only based on the realities on the ground. And these proposals are exactly what I'd call exotic and unpriemlемый. Okay. Finally, how about the depriving the world of wheat and other agriculture and other projects? Well, we've been through that. We have a bumper harvest, 60 million tons. The Minister of Agriculture said, this is a very solid foundation. There are workarounds here. Nobody's going to starve. There will be no shortage on the global market. So what we have here is a situation where Putin is addressing, right after he gave a major speech for his political party before the elections, and he's saying, look, we're in our measured pace. We're retaliating, but we're not going overboard. We are winning on the front, which they are indisputably. That is along the long, 800-mile front. And it's just a matter of time before the Ukrainians fall apart. They continue to do these very strange things with their drones, and they make their exotic proposals from these other people. But don't send Jared Kushner and Witkoff here again unless they come out with proposals that are not exotic. He says he didn't say that exactly, but that's what he pretty much meant. So Ukraine is, people saying it's a stalemate. I can't believe that the Western press is still saying Ukraine has a chance to win. I mean, you don't have to root for Russia, but you have to recognize reality, as they didn't recognize when they got into this damn thing. They didn't look at a map. They didn't do the basic strategic calculations necessary, neither Biden's people nor Trump. So, uh, what's going to happen? I think the Ukrainians will have lost on the front by this by the time the wet season comes in and nobody can kind of move. Then it depends on how they get through the winter without any electricity, and will they sue for some sort of surrender or they would have to, it would seem. But Zelensky, as long as he's around, he leaves his troops in vulnerable positions where they get into these cauldrons, and they should have retreated like 3 weeks prior, and they're all going to be dead or captured. So it doesn't look good for Ukraine. Putin is proceeding in his perspicacious way, not going too far. He's not going to go too fast, and he seems quite able. If you watch this thing today, which I did, it's ask me this question and I'll tell you. It's very measured, and he projects a feeling of self-confidence, and I think that's not artificial. I think it's real. But he has to be careful about these people who want to bomb Germany or bomb Latvia, members of the NATO alliance. Well, precisely for the reasons we mentioned before. Trump is unpredictable. If Latvia invoked Article 5, I guess, of the NATO treaty, what would Trump do? Well, you've heard me say this before. He would ask around what the chances are that NATO would get involved, and they'd say 5%, no problem. And it's, yeah, 5% when we're winning. 5% is too far, too much. Forget about it. We're not going to do that kind of thing. So I think it's going to slug around. I'd be interested to hear what Scott thinks about this.
Well, I share your assessment. I mean, look, the war has taken a turn. You're not going to understand the turn that it's taken by reading Western media. It's taken a turn militarily, and it's taken a turn politically, and it's taken a turn economically. And these are sort of the big three. And militarily, look, there's a lot of fighting going on, but if we just look at the drone aspect of it, because it's sort of the telling, the Ukrainians started a major drone-based warfare back in the summer of 2025. Remember Operation Spiderweb? The bold use of covert drone manufacturing capacity to put it on trucks and drive the trucks up so they could send drones off to hit Russian airfields. That should have triggered a Russian nuclear response. It actually, boldly crossed the red lines that Russia had established, but it didn't, because Putin's not looking for a nuclear war. He looked at the bombers that were destroyed and went, all right, we can ride this one out. Then Alaska came. And if you remember, before Alaska was in August of 2025, and in June of 2025, Putin put down some very, very hard conditions, very, very hard. No compromise whatsoever on the territorial integrity of Russia. None. Zero. Squat. Don't even think about it. I'll shoot you. And then in August, he went to Alaska, and suddenly, apparently, he compromised absolutely on territory. The deal that was put on the table was a freezing of the front and the concept of a territorial swap. The only area that wasn't compromised was Donbass. Russia would have to get the totality of the Donbass, but the line that existed in Zaporozhye and Kherson, the Russians were saying, "Okay, we'll freeze that. What you got, you get. What we got, we got." And if you want us to give you back the Sumy territories and the Kharkiv territories, then we're going to have to swap. Meaning we'll get out of Kharkov, the area around Kharkov, but then we get all of Zaporozhye. We'll withdraw from Sumy, but then we get all of Kherson. And so this was the notion. But then that would lead to a ceasefire. So a freezing leading to a ceasefire. And the Russians actually put that on the table, and they were dead serious. This was actually run through all of the Putin doesn't do anything half-assed. Everything is deliberative, and it was run through all of the policymakers. The generals all agreed. Many generals may have not wanted to, but the generals all signed off on it. This was not Putin making stuff up. This was Russian policy. Territorial swap, freezing of the line, ceasefire. We're going to bring an end to this war. And then what happened? The United States lied, straight up lied. And then the Ukrainians and their European advisors and the CIA doubled down on stupid, extending this drone attack. You might recall December 25th, maybe, of 2025, a frantic phone call between Putin and Trump to talk about peace, about Alaska, how to preserve this, how do we solve it, what can we do to make this thing happen? And Trump went, hey, hold on the line just a second. I got to go talk to some people. And while that happened, 98 drones came flying in from Ukraine to attack where Vladimir Putin was, in Valdai, his residence in Valdai. It was an assassination attempt. At the same time that this happened, the CIA published an article that said, yeah, we're the ones guiding the drones in. So it became a CIA-backed Ukrainian assassination. The CIA didn't say we're trying to kill Putin. They said we're the ones guiding the drones in to hit the oil refineries. We're the ones giving them the intelligence to do this. Now, if you're giving them the intelligence to do that, you're giving them the intelligence to send their drones elsewhere too, because it's all about going around air defense. It's about shooting gaps in radar. It's about hugging terrain. All the things that Ukraine can't do on their own. They need all the intelligence from the United States. It goes into mapping out how these drones get through. And so it was the United States trying to kill President Putin in December. Straight up. And the Russians know this. This is why they gave the United States the chip taken from one of the drones with the guidance information on it. And they gave it to the air attaché and said, hey, why don't you guys take a look at this? And shut up, because we know exactly what happened. We can reverse engineer this chip and tell you where all the intelligence came from, because it gives specific guidelines. You don't fly below a hill line here unless you had intelligence about elevation of terrain matched with electronic signals from radars, etc. I've done this for a living. I know what it takes to reverse engineer this, and I know what the Russians know about that chip. I mean, I know it not because they told me, but because it's just common sense in the intelligence business. So the United States was put on notice, and the Russians were put on notice that the United States is not serious. And then as we move into this year, we have the Russians starting to say that, no, the Americans aren't serious at all. And now, the most recent ramification is Rubio denies there was a deal on the table. And the Russians are like, well, we know, hey, Marco, we were there. You can say whatever the hell you want. We were there. We know exactly what was said. We know what was agreed to. You can come out and say things in the public, but we were there. And they say, we don't trust the Americans anymore. We don't trust them at all. This is an important factor, because when Putin speaks about in his little statement about people with whom we respect, it's the United States he's talking about. The Russians don't respect the United States at all. They don't trust the United States at all. He says that because it's the politically correct thing to say. But the undercurrent is there's no reason to trust the United States, because the United States has lied every step of the way. There's been no element of integrity on the part of the Trump administration. The Russians view this man as emotionally irrational, emotionally unstable, and they don't believe anything coming out of the United States. Now we move on to, the Russian response. This drone war. On the battlefield, the Ukrainians flooded the battlefield with drones. I went there, and I started talking to the Russians in March about going to Russia to research drone warfare, of all things. And the Russians were like, that sounds like we can support this. And in March, I sat down with one of their military officers, and we mapped out what I wanted to do. I said, I want to do this, 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 and this. And he went, we understand why you want to do it, and we think that's a good reason for you to do it, and we'll get back to you. And then they started coming back to me saying, hey, it's getting a little hot here right now. Some of the things you want to do, we can't do because there's Ukrainian drones everywhere, and they're blowing everything up. And you can't go to this place. 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 They actually at one point in time said, we may have to cancel the whole trip. It's that dangerous. And I said, I really want to do this. And so we compromised, and I went. Every day I was in the SMO region, I was under threat from Ukrainian drones. Ukrainian drones were everywhere. They were blowing everything up. Highways were hard to drive on. Um, it was just a reality. But what I noticed from the Russians was an absolute lack of panic. I mean, I was expecting them to be like, "Oh my God, the sky's falling," and the Russians are like, "Yeah, it's tough right now. The Ukrainians sort of are doing their thing, but we got them. We figured it out." And they took me to, for instance, the drone research and combat research and development facility where they're actually working it out. And I was shocked that they gave me access. And I'm just sitting there going, "Why are you doing this?" "Well, you asked, you wanted to see this." I said, "Yeah, but this is like, this is really sensitive." They're like, "Oh, we trust you." I said, "But we have no agreement." They said, "We understand. We understand. But we think it's important that you see this so you understand what's going on." And what I saw is that the Russians had it all figured out, everything from Starlink on down. And they had a solution for everything. And they said, "Yeah, the Ukrainians are having their moment, but this moment is about to end." Ladies and gentlemen, the Ukrainian moment is over. Ukrainians are getting slaughtered on the battlefield. They've lost drone dominance. The Russians have drone dominance now. The Russians are using, literally thousands of drones in per sector per day that are eviscerating the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are losing drone operators like, like you wouldn't believe. I was talking about 80 to 100 a couple of weeks. They're losing more than that today. They're getting slaughtered. The Ukrainians can't even project drone power anymore because they're getting blown up. They bring in the Hornets. The Hornets use Starlink. The Hornets are getting blown out of the sky. All this. Now the Ukrainians have gone into strategic stuff, hitting. They've expanded the war, the 40-day drone war. Fatal mistake on the part of the Ukrainians. Fatal mistake. Look at the basic math. Over a 2-day period, a 3-day period, they sent 1,400 plus drones into Russia. 1,400. I think 4 penetrated the inner ring of Moscow. They didn't do anything. A couple hit some refineries. They didn't do anything. They burned down some wild berry places. Now they've gone into ozone, I guess, is another supply thing. Russia's like, okay. And as Putin said, "Well, okay, you want to play that game? We play it too." And Russia's destroying Ukraine as we speak, from top to bottom. There will be nothing left of Ukraine by the time this is done. And that's a strategic decision that Putin has made. There will be nothing left of Ukraine by the time this is done. The Russians have all the resources available. I know this. And they're now been given free rein to launch the attack. And look at the things they're doing. I mean, you hear the people say the Russians they're blowing up civilian sites. Yeah, that shopping mall in Kiroiro, which is Zelensky's hometown, I believe. It was a drone factory. The Ukrainians have been converting all of their shopping malls into when you go to a shopping mall, you go underneath and there's the warehouse delivery place where the trucks come in and bring in the goods for the stores. And those have all been turned over to the military. And actually, these big white trucks come in and back in, and they load FP1 and FP2 drones onto them. And then these trucks drive out. Now, they're civilian trucks. And then they go to places where they stop and they fire. Now, the Ukrainians are so stupid that they've actually bragged about this. And they've put out videos and stuff of these trucks stop with the thing rolled up, and the drones are being fired from these trucks into Russia. And now what the Russians did yesterday is they came in with a Iskander with cluster munitions at one of these assembly areas and blew it up. And the Ukrainians are first like, "They're blowing up our trucks, our civilian trucks. These war criminals." But then the photographs come out and they're all burned out. And you see the FPV-1 and 2 drones inside burned out. Russia's not killing civilians. Russia's not blowing up civilian targets. Russia's destroying the totality of Ukraine's industrial infrastructure, which Ukraine has spent the last 3 years embedding into its civilian infrastructure. That is a war crime. That is a war crime to use to hide behind civilians. And this is what Ukraine's doing. It's over for Ukraine. And it's not just Putin saying, what he said. Lavrov said some things too that were very interesting yesterday. Lavrov talked about what it means is a ceasefire. What does a ceasefire mean? He said it would be a betrayal of everything we stand for. A ceasefire would be a betrayal of everything we stand for. And what does Russia stand for? And this is where the American people might want to actually read some Russian history, because 2 things happened recently that are quite big. One, at the end of July, Zelensky went to the Ukrainian parliament and asked them to convert Pechera Lavra It is sort of it's a monastery in Kiev. It's the birthplace of Eastern Orthodoxy. It's one of the most holy places in the Eastern Orthodoxy and Russian Orthodoxy. And they're going to build a pantheon of heroes on the soil of Pechera Lavra. This is where they're going to bury, they're probably going to try and exhume Stepan Bandera's remains and bring it back, but they're going to bring the remains of their Nazi heroes and bury them on this place. And they're going to turn it into literally a place where the ideology of Bandera is going to be celebrated as these are our heroes on the soil of the most sacred site in Eastern Orthodoxy. If you don't understand how this insults Russia, and when I say insult Russia, I'm not talking about just Orthodox Russia, because Russia is a nation of faith. There are 30 to 40 million Russians who actually are Muslims, practicing Muslims. I actually was in Chechnya in March, and I interviewed the Grand Mufti of Chechnya, the most senior religious guy. I've spoken to Abdi Aladanov, who is a very senior Russian army officer, who's a Chechen background, a Muslim. The Muslims of Russia are people of faith. And so when you have the Ukrainians desecrating the Orthodox faith, the Muslims are saying, you're desecrating us, you're desecrating all of Russia, you're desecrating what we believe in. And if the Americans and the Europeans don't want to understand it, then they can remain ignorant. But this is a big deal. Putin, I guess in the Kremlin, they're doing some renovation. And they went into one of these because there's a lot of churches in the Kremlin grounds, and they went into one and they were renovating. They came upon this white sarcophagus, and they said, "What the hell is this?" And they went and they opened it up, and my God, it's Dmitry Donskoy. Dmitry Donskoy. Well, who the hell is that? Maybe if you listened to Vladimir Putin when he answered Tucker Carlson's question, you might know. But Dmitry Donskoy was a prince who defeated the Mongols in the Battle of Kulakova, and and so Putin's sitting there looking at him. And do you guys just understand what's happening here? What's happening in my mind is the equivalent of when Joseph Stalin brought the Lady of Kazan icon out and put it in an airplane and flew it over Moscow and flew it over the front during the Battle of Moscow. And the Soviet soldiers all fell to their knees and crossed themselves as the Lady of Kazan flew. This is Joseph Stalin, the communist. And the Lady of Kazan is flying over the troops defending Moscow, and they fell to their knees. If you don't understand what that means, you don't know anything about the Russians, a deeply faith-driven people. And so here we have the Russians playing the faith card like you've never seen it played before. When Lavrov says, a ceasefire would betray everything we stand for. That is the foundation upon which Putin made his statement. There will be no peace. It will be unconditional surrender. Ukraine will be defeated, and that's the reality the world needs to understand. That's my take.
Yeah, let me, okay, Joe, if I say a couple things.
Go on, please.
I mean, we've been ignoring you, and I'm sorry about that.
I'm happy to be ignored. I can actually go off to the loo. Anyway.
Dmitry Donskoy fended off the Mongols on the river Don. Okay, so his real name was Dmitry something else, but he's Donskoy, just like Alexander Nevsky is for the river Neva. Anyway, that's really interesting history. Also interesting is the betrayal that you mentioned, Scott, the betrayal of everything Russia stands for, Lavrov. Now, before Alaska, Trump had his minions, Witkoff and Kushner, give a proposal to the Russians just about a week before. And that's what they worked with in Anchorage. Now, they were told, ceasefire, forget about it. No ceasefire, okay? But on the plane going to Anchorage, Trump's talking to Fox News person, and he says, I'll be terribly disappointed if we don't get some kind of ceasefire out of this deal, Think about that. Megalomania, he's going to impress uh, Putin to the point where no ceasefire, he's going to change that into a ceasefire. Well, that didn't work, okay? And Putin made it clear that there was not going to be any ceasefire. And so Trump said, oh, okay. Then Putin made it clear that before he would meet with Zelensky, Trump had to promise to use his leverage on Zelensky to address this deal, which, as you point out, had some Russian concessions in it. You're right about this. They talk about the concessions they had to sell that to Zelensky, and then maybe even Putin would meet with Zelensky, but not before. And then maybe they'd have a ceasefire. Okay, that was the deal. That's my idea of what the deal was. I think it's similar to yours. And Fyodor Lukyanov said so much today. It's really interesting. What he said was, look, we went to Anchorage, expectations were so high that they were almost certain to be disappointed. The real question is whether Anchorage could provide a starting point for the peace process. It didn't. Lukyanov is one of Putin's most closest academic type advisors. What it did do, Anchorage, was expose the diverging interests between Europe and the US. And that's a good thing, says Lukyanov. The NATO is not going to survive in its present form. And he said, also what Anchorage demonstrated that the US isn't all powerful. Here it is, quote, Trump was unable to secure from Western Europe and Ukraine what he wanted at that time. So Washington's failure worked against Moscow, but the broader recognition of American power has limits. This broader recognition, this should be regarded as a positive element because taken together, it means there are no magic, his word, no magic agreements or gentlemen's agreements. It's only, it lasts only as the other gentleman arrives with different priorities, okay? At the end, he says, during the years since Alaska, there's been an internal logic of its own, and it's within that logic that Russia must seek a way to end the present war and prevent the next one without waiting for magical solutions or grand bargains imposed from above. So, what I just like to point out there is you have Trump making this proposal. It probably Witkoff had immediate ceasefire in there. He was told, no way. Trump said, okay. Then he expects to get the ceasefire anyway. And he's told by Putin, no way. He doesn't know how to cope with this, but he does promise because he thinks he can. I'll get those Europeans around, and I'll bring Zelensky around, and then we'll, what happened? He wasn't able to do that. So maybe he thought, oh, I might not be able to do that. So when at the very end of that, this is really interesting to me. At the end of that whole affair, Putin spoke for 15 minutes. The only substance came from him, none from Trump. And at the end, as you'll remember very well, Scott and Joe too, Putin said, and we had a very good, we're off to a good start for a rapprochement, and we're going to meet again next time in Moscow. He says in English, next time in Moscow. And Trump gets up to the phone. He says, well, oh, wow, that would be, I don't know if that'll be, we'll talk about that. But now, if I'm Putin and I see that there's a somewhat successful summit, And I say, my God, this guy can't even compete. It can't even agree to have the next summit wherever, in Moscow, wherever. He can't even say, yeah, we can. Well, this guy must be not in fully control. So that was August. You painted the picture at the turn of the year. Oh, this guy is not only not in fully control, but the CIA is trying to murder me. Luckily, I wasn't there, right? And so now we have Lukyanov saying, look, it's over. We had high expectations. We realized that we have to do this a different way. So in a way, Anchorage is dead. Um, uh, Lavrov said that. Then Rubio said there was no agreement in Alaska, and then a couple of days later, Putin said, "Oh, yes, there was." So there are contradictions here. Putin and his entourage want to keep that opening to the U.S., and every time they have a chance, they say, "Yeah, we respect, or the U.S. is trying to help us on this, but they can't." The others are pushing more strongly, though it's not very different. Well, it is very different, as you correctly point out, from this situation exactly a year ago, August 15th, right? And the Russians are the ones that learned these lessons the hard way, and now they're saying, okay, well, U.S. can't really play any role in Ukraine. They admit that they're not really impartial, for God's sake, especially since they're giving them this intelligence and all this other stuff. So we're going to have to do this ourselves. And that's the path we're on. Where that will go, but I think by the end of the year, we'll know where that will go, because in my view, the armed forces along that line will have prevailed, and Putin is not going to be tricked into doing something so stupid as to get Trump back in with the rest of NATO. The rest of NATO doesn't really matter.
Just interesting, you bring up Fyodor Lukyanov. I know him. We actually intersect on a board of advisors for a certain organization, and he's the head of research or something like it for Valdai, the Valdai Club.
Right. Mm-hmm.
This is a big deal. This is a big deal. And when you look at the annual Valdai gathering, Fyodor Lukyanov is right there asking the questions. He's the
Right.
the guy moderating it. But Fyodor is sort of the intellectual holdover of the liberal progressives of Russian policy making. There is not a conservative bone in Fyodor Lukyanov's body. Fyodor Lukyanov is actually somebody who is inclined to want to work with the West, and he has been somebody who has been part of that element that has been resistant to not getting an off ramp. He wanted this off ramp. So for you to say what you said, which is exactly accurate, I just think America needs to understand that we lost Fyodor Lukyanov. He's not with us anymore. Fyodor was always one of these people in there that was like, how do we get Putin to the United States? How do we bring them together? How can we shortcut this war? How can we accommodate the West? How can we do this? How can we do this? And what Lukyanov's saying now is, nah, that door's gone. We're moving in this direction. And this is big because, Vladimir Putin, I've been studying this guy for a long, long, long time. I don't claim to be the greatest Putin-nologist in the world, but this is one of the most deliberative decision makers in the history of deliberative decision making. Putin just doesn't go off on a whim, and he listens to everybody. And when I say listens to everybody, he truly listens and incorporates everything. And Lukyanov had his ear. A lot of the reticence that you see in terms of Putin, going hard, the way a lot of the conservative people want. We want Putin to go hard. We want Putin to go hard. A lot of the reticence comes from the intellectualism of people of such quality, and like Fyodor Lukyanov, who could sit there and whisper in his ear, going, "Nah, we don't want to go hard, boss. Let's talk about this." And Putin listens. And the thing about Putin listening is he just doesn't hear you. he listens to you. That means he absorbs what you say and he puts it into his mind and he sits back and he goes, let me consider that. And it's very frustrating for the conservative element of Russia because they want him to go, Vladimir Putin is the biggest gift to humanity that God could have put on the earth at this time, I believe, because this is a man who is not going to yield to the base inclinations of people of violence. Vladimir Putin, of course, is capable of greenlighting violence. We see that right now in Ukraine. But I agree with you, Ray. He is not going to, there's no reason for him to go to war with Europe. Listen to what Fyodor Lukyanov said. NATO will not be with us much longer. So all these people out there that are talking about Kaliningrad, because that's a big thing right now. I mean, you've got, again, mental warfare. I'm telling you guys, this is a thing. Ilnitsky's onto something. All these things about, because NATO's in no position to actually do anything with Kaliningrad. We have no capability whatsoever. But we're flying reconnaissance missions. Now you have the Germans leaking their secret war plan of how they're going to move in on Kaliningrad. And you've got former German ministers saying Kaliningrad is German. And you got the Lithuanians saying we should take Kaliningrad from the Soviets. And they're all saying it. It can never happen because they don't have any capability, but it doesn't matter. Inside Russia, people are going, those bastards are coming after Kaliningrad. Hey, Vladimir Vladimirovich, you can't allow this to happen. We need to preemptively nuke Sweden and Finland. We need to do all this. And Putin's like, I hear you. Thank you. Thank you. I've heard what you had to say. Thank you. We're not going to do that. We're going to keep going because all those people that are talking about going to, they're going to be gone in a little while. Like Macron. Macron can come out today and say all he wants about Russia and all. Macron's history on April 18th, Macron will be finished as the president of France. And he's already finished as the president of France because nobody cares. So that nuclear deal that he cut with the British with Starmer, you remember Northwoods? They got together and they said, we have joint nuclear policy. Oh my God, it's terrible. The British and the French have finally come together with joint nuclear policy. Well, Starmer's gone. All the British submarines are in dock. And Macron's going to be gone. If he's replaced by Marine Le Pen, that Northwoods is done. The French are like, we're going to send Rafale fighters with nuclear bombs to Finland. And the Finns are going, yay, we're going to take your Rafale fighters with nuclear bombs. The Russians are going, we'll just nuke you. But it doesn't matter because Marine Le Pen's going to come in and go, we're not sending Rafale fighters with nuclear. So it becomes a self-solving problem. And this is where Fyodor Lukyanov is 100% correct. All of these things that people are trying to project into Russia to get the right wing to dominate Putin's thinking, to get Putin to behave irrationally, to bring Trump back into the fold. Because Trump just gave a speech. Did anybody hear what Trump said? I'm going to pull my troops out of Europe. Oh, I guess I just made some breaking news there. Did anybody catch that? I just made some breaking news. Guys, it's over. NATO's finished. It's going to die sooner rather than later. And so why would Putin do anything to breathe life? I mean, doing anything like attacking Latvia, you're just taking an AED and popping the stilled heart of Europe. You might bring it back to life and shock it and bring it back. You don't want to do that. Let it die. It's dying. It's doing everything you want it to do. Let it die. And that's what Putin's doing. He's just letting it die. And believe me, what he's doing with Ukraine is going to kill Europe quicker than anything. I mean, I wrote a little piece today. I know I might be going off. Sorry, Joe, Ray, but I do a lot of research into this stuff. I really do spend an awful lot of time trying to understand what the hell's going on. Back in May, there was a meeting in. They came together. The Ukrainians said we're not getting the Patriot missile, so we're going to build our own. The FP7, the Freya program, Freya, the Norse goddess of war. I mean, she's amazing, and we're going to paint the missile pink because why not? But then in July 13th, they had a gathering in Paris where all these companies came together to come up with a consortium of the willing to build the Freya missile. And my God, we're going to have a Patriot replacement by 2027. We're going to test it. And Mikhail Fedorov, the defense minister, was there going, yes, this is it. And Zelensky saying, yes, the Freya is everything. Please pour all the resources in the Freya and everything. And everybody's going, my God, there's a replacement for. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just tell you what this really was. This is why everything you hear about The Freya is a fake missile. It's never going to exist. It's a corruption front. FP is Firepoint. Firepoint is the name of this Ukrainian defense company that was created in 2022 by a former scout of Zelensky's, the scout that would go out to look at a site where they were going to do film propaganda. So the guy that would go out and scout a location scout. That's his qualifications. There was a female who is an architect, but then she became a business person who became a talent scout, for film projects. And then there was this other businessman who was in Russia doing corrupt real estate deals that were discovered by the FSB. So he had to leave Russia with a problem. These three people came together and they pulled together $1.5 million in investments in 2022. Today, Firepoint is a $6 billion company, but they didn't do it by building things. They did it by absorbing Ukrainian defense industrial capacity through a shares buyout program, similar to what the Russian oligarchs did to steal things. It's a front company. Fedorov helped sell the FP1 drone to the Ukrainian military at $55,000 to $60,000 a pop. Picking this over a competitor who could build it for $5,000 a pop. But Fedorov did that because they overpriced it to bring in the money. There's a guy named Timur Mindich is a corrupt friend of Zelensky who had to flee to Israel because he's just so damn corrupt. He is a shareholder of Firepoint. And Fedorov put 60% of Ukraine's drone money into Firepoint, which then made it into the pockets of everybody, to include these European defense industrialists who are now lining up to receive money to build a missile that doesn't exist except in the mind of Zelensky. Ladies and gentlemen, I just described to you the reality of Ukraine's defense industry. It is corrupt as the day is long. It doesn't work. And yet we go along with it because everybody's making money off Ukraine. Right now, Ukraine is a dead body that's being fleeced by everybody. It's like the rich uncle that put little gold coin here, little gold coin here, little gold coin here. Now he's dead, and all the relatives come in and they're looking for the gold coins. Ukraine is a dead body, and Europe and everybody's running and going, how much money can we get out of Ukraine before it goes under? That's the reality of what's going on. And then we're putting that up against a president who is resurrecting the memory of Dmitry Donskoy, in a nation that is furious at the desecration of Pechera Lavra. That's reality. This is the other reality. You can decide yourself who's going to win this one.
Yeah, just a comment, to say that the Ukrainian defense industries are corrupt is sort of like saying that the Titanic today is wet, I mean, that's it. The only other thing I'll say is that I agree, we're lucky to have Vladimir Putin in place. God help us when he leaves the scene. There are lots of people have it in for him. Maybe the next time Valdai, the president's palace on Valdai or somewhere else, maybe whoever wants to get him gets him. And I'm not suggesting that this would be Trump approved. I am guessing this would be deep state approved. And there are all kinds of signs growing these days that Trump is not even completely in charge, that the deep state is. And just look at how Tony Fauci is being defended by those who that facilitated his cover-up as well as his gain-of-function research. The cover-up was facilitated and actually directed by the then Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, who was supposed to be doing her job, but also told Biden that Russia was running out of weapons and they had no indigenous capability to replace the weapons that they were leaving willy-nilly on the battlefield. And I'm speaking of December 2022. 2022. So you get a lot of corruption. Why she did that? Well, lots of people think the deep state was behind that. They wanted this war to go on. And of course, you have the corruption, which is just as prevalent in our industries as the Titanic is wet.
It is wet. It is wet, Ray.
All right, guys, I like to end on another note, not as serious, although it is serious, and that's the Pentagon that's run by Pete Hegseth. We've been talking about Hegseth, and apparently his wife, a TV producer from Fox, was his producer on Fox News. According to the New York Times, she's like co-defense secretary. I don't know if you guys saw that article, but he just announced this weekend that he's firing the editor and publisher of Stars and Stripes. I had a friend who worked at Stars and Stripes. By Congress, there's a statute that says it has to be independent of the military. And it's, of course, the issue was it was reporting on the problems on the Abraham Lincoln. And the editor had gone on a podcast, whatever, and spoke about these problems. So it was critical of the military, but in favor of the families, which is who the readers are of this newspaper, and the soldiers, of course.
Right.
So what do you think, Scott, being a military man, about Stars and Stripes and the Pentagon firing the editor and the publisher?
Look, I was a military brat, and I lived in Turkey from 1975 to 77. Then I lived in Germany from 77 to 79, went to high school in both places. I played sports there. And I have to tell you, we loved the Stars and Stripes because, when they reported on our high school football games. I mean, so man, you had a good game. You wanted to see how the Stars and Stripes covered it. And they had
Right.
regional editions. And so you came in there, there it is. And I have clippings downstairs where I cut it out. I'm like, Scott Ritter caught the winning touchdown pass. Yay, my moment of glory. But the point is, the Stars and Stripes, it was essential for the morale of American families deployed overseas, especially, for instance, in Turkey. There were no other alternatives. Ray, I lived in Turkey right during the period of time of the Turkish backlash against the United States for sanctioning them on Cyprus. I mean, it was, there were problems. You talk about shutting down all things. I knew all about that, but why? Because suddenly all my friends' parents were unemployed. It's like, where's your dad work? Well, he's off in Sinop. Well, not anymore. Sinop's been shut down. Where's your dad work? Well, he's monitoring, Simith-Falatin's nuclear explosions, but not anymore. They shut it down, and there was a lot of uncertainty. People were like, are we leaving? Are we doing? Or are we staying? Everybody knew what was going on. But same thing in Germany. I mean, this was essential reading, and in Germany, it's where you went to get, the information that was the truth. I mean, the Stars and Stripes did a really, really good job about reporting about the things that were important to military families. The things, I mean, you could get. I remember in Kaiserslautern getting the, you get the garrison commander. If Stars and Stripes wrote an article that said, the commissary is selling bad chicken, the garrison commander had to do something, man. And he got up and he had to address this, bring in who's responsible for the bad chicken. We don't want good chicken. Boom, 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 had to take action. That was the role of the media. That's what the media is supposed to do, expose things and make people. So the Stars and Stripes does an amazing job. So for the Stars and Stripes to advocate on behalf of the families of the sailors deployed on the Abraham Lincoln, that's their duty. That's their responsibility. They're not trying to make policy. They're not in a policy making way. They are in a reporting way. They're doing legitimate journalism. And Pete Hegseth is, again, guys, what do we want when we appoint a failed battalion operations officer who is an alcoholic and a womanizer and has no ethical foundation whatsoever, zero moral compass, and he's dumber than dirt, literally dumber than dirt. The man has no knowledge. And so now we put him in there and we allowed his, this is a man who thinks it's a good idea to inject everybody in the military, including women, with testosterone to make us able to bench press more, apparently. But because he's so good at bench pressing, he lifts 315 pounds, which only 98, that's more than 98% of the men who go to the gym can lift. My God, Pete, you're amazing. You're a stud, but you're stupid and you're not American. Interfering with the press is interfering with the press. Now, you speak of Congress's mandate and all that. Let's see what Congress does, because this is the time for congressional intervention. This is the time for Congress to come up and say, you don't get to fire this person. That isn't going to happen. That person's getting their job back. We want you in front of us. And maybe Pete will come in there and throw one of his brilliant Pete Heggs says, I am really in charge. I'm a rational human. And then he gives the Iranians an excuse to make another Lego movie that mocks him. But no, this is a travesty. Every American should understand that what happened here is a frontal assault on free press, freedom of speech in the United States, and it should not be allowed to stand.
Also fired the Middle East correspondent. Ray, do you have anything you want to end with on that?
No,
Or
I
anything
think
else?
I served enough time overseas to agree completely. You know, you could buy the Herald Tribune or the New York Times, but yeah, it costs $3 for God's sake. Even in those days, so you get the Stars and Stripes virtually for free. It kept you abreast of what was going on. It was pretty factual. Matter of fact, you know, going forward into this century, when I started writing about the failure of intelligence or the prostitution of intelligence before the war in Iraq, I get articles printed in the Stars and Stripes. Now, it was after after it was clear that this had happened, but still, I was always, people have advised me, send it to the Navy Stars and Stripes, send it to in other words, there are different stripes for different people, but it all came together. So, yeah, for them to prostitute this is, hurts the people that we served with. It deprives them of any chance to know what's going on because, well, I lectured once in Annapolis, and guess what was booming from every public arena, every public cafeteria, whatever? Fox News, okay? That's all they got. And the Stars and Stripes was a far cry from what Fox News is or was, and it's a far cry from what Hegseth puts out. So, yeah, this is really, I mean, as if we needed more indignities and suffered inflicted on us. Yeah, I agree, and it should be fought against. And as you pointed out, Joe, their Middle East correspondent was also fired. This is pretty blatant. Can't other media representatives stand up and say, "Hey, what the going on?" Well, apparently they can't. And that's a very sad story. Joe, you know a lot of these guys because you worked with them decades ago. What's your take on the Stars and Stripes?
Well, I only knew one guy, a friend of mine, who worked at the Daily News in New York, and then I helped him. I don't know. I went and applied for a job actually in Darmstadt for the Stars and Stripes. It would not have been a good fit whatsoever. But my friend was in a Vietnam vet, and he was pretty gung ho, and it was a very good fit for him, and he had the background. I'm just it's interesting that a publication like that had the kind of independence that it had. You would think that the military would be controlling it, and it apparently wasn't, but it is now. And it's another example of the Trump administration's authoritarianism and running roughshod over things that have been part of the, whatever is good about America is still remaining. They're destroying, it seems like, one by one. And one of them is Stars and Stripes. So I would just say Stars and Stripes forever. And hopefully the New York Times did do a good piece on it. That's how I learned about this. I hope that the press club here in Washington says something about it. They're useless on most of these issues. It took them years, and they never supported Julian Assange, the Washington Press Club. So, no, but this is, again, as a member of I worked for corporate media, and I'm obviously now working in independent media. So I never worked for a military publication, but I think that it had a certain independence and it needs to be defended, and it's a disgrace. So I want to end the program with a program note. We come on the air at 8 p.m. on Eastern Time. That cuts out any kind of guests from Europe, basically from Britain or Europe. That's 4 a.m. It's 2 a.m. in Britain, 3 a.m. in the European continent when we begin. 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. Although Scott joined us from France at 2 a.m. And you could see even now he was on East Coast time. He's yawning because we've gone over 2.5 hours. And I thank you for that. So we're considering we're taking a week break because Scott and I are going to be in Switzerland to do at a conference. And I want to invite you, Scott, and Patrick Bob, German journalist, excellent one, who I just met with and interviewed in Berlin earlier this month, to do our regular show, this show, from the library, if you remember, where Patrick did his interviews. If you're available for an hour after lunch on one of those days, there he is, a salute. So I want to ask also both you and Scott whether 9 a.m. Sunday mornings, when we compete with these Meet the Press, Face the Nation, etc., is that a time slot that you guys could join on a more or less regular basis if we need you? Sunday mornings at 9?
Look, Johnny Cash taught me about Sunday mornings coming down, and yeah, I'll be with you.
You can do it.
That's
What about you, Ray?
Sunday morning coming down. Yeah,
right.
I can do it. I have permission. I checked.
Okay, good. All right, so we're going to really consider, and I ask the viewers to write in the comment section whether you would like us to change our time from 8 p.m. Saturday night Eastern time to 9 a.m. Sunday morning, next day, 9 a.m., which would be the afternoon in Europe and 11 p.m. at this time in Australia, which we have to consider because our producer, Kathy Vogan, is there. We don't want to keep her up too late. So that's 9 a.m. Only the people on the West Coast are being left behind at 6 a.m. So with that said, I want to thank Ray and Scott for joining us again on The World This Week. We had plenty to chew over, and there'll be more when we resume 2 weeks from now from Switzerland, hopefully, if that gets arranged. For Consortium News, for Kathy Vogan, for our audience, thank you very much. Please subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you next time we're on. Goodbye.
Get out your notebook. There's more.
If you are a consumer of independent news, then the first place you should be going to is Consortium News, and please do try to support them when you can. It doesn't have its articles behind a paywall. It's free for everyone. It's one of the best news sites out there, and it's been in the business of independent journalism and adversarial independent journalism for over 2 decades. I hope that with the public's continuing support of Consortium News, it will continue for a very long time to come. Thank you so much.